Hello, I'm Andrew Stephen, the L'Oreal Professor of Marketing, Research Dean and Director of the Oxford Future of Marketing Initiative right here at the Side Business School at the University of Oxford. I recently had a conversation with Steve Hatch. Steve is the Vice President for Northern Europe at Meta, which is of course the company we used to know as Facebook. Steve is one of the senior executives on the commercial side at Meta, and we had a conversation about quite a lot of topics, including running businesses and growing businesses on Meta's platforms such as Facebook and Instagram, what commerce indeed looks like on these platforms, or social commerce if you will, and of course also talked quite a lot about the future of technology in the sort of communications space, and talked about the Metaverse and the role of virtual reality, which of course Meta, through its Oculus division, has been building for some time and is now positioning even closer towards. So it was a really interesting conversation with a senior leader from one of the world's, I guess, most prolific technology companies and most well-known technology companies. And so I encourage you to have a listen to see what Steve and I had to say. So good morning and welcome to our third marketing deep dive for the Oxford MBA marketing course. Today, it's great to have Steve Hatch, who's the Vice President for Northern Europe at Meta, the company formerly known as Facebook. You're probably all getting used to the name change. So Steve is here to talk mostly about marketing, but also his experiences as a marketing leader, but also just more broadly as a business leader in really one of the world's better known companies for all sorts of reasons. So Steve has had a very long and successful career in marketing on the agency side, as well as now at Meta for a number of years on the sort of the platform side. And so I think we're just really lucky that Steve can spend some time with us today to really talk about, I think the future of marketing and where this exciting discipline that is very, very tech enabled is heading. So Steve, welcome. Thanks for joining us. And I'm going to hand it over to you first to kind of tell us your points of view, I guess, on where we're headed, and then we'll have a chat.
Oh, yeah, great. Thanks, Andrew. And hi, everyone. It's kind of odd when you can't see everyone, but hopefully you can like see and hear me. Okay, yeah, as Andrew said, I'm Steve Hatch, VP at Meta for Northern Europe. And real privilege to be with you today. We've had a really long-standing relationship with the call and with Andrew, and it's kind of great to see some of the academic work that's coming out of this realm is really beginning to shape a lot of the global narratives, particularly about how we think about brands are being built now and how they're going to be built in the future. So yeah, we thought we'd start with like 7 or 8 minutes, just thinking about, in particular, like the question of the future, like what's next. And as Andrew said, like I'm very happy to jump into any topic. There normally isn't anything that doesn't have kind of social media and technology involved in it in some way, and I'm hopefully we can jump into those things. But I thought I might want to start by looking at the ways that we are thinking about the trends that are shaping this new era of marketing. And I guess the question I get asked more than any other, and probably the question that this group of people is as well placed, maybe better placed than the many to answer, which is what's next. Now, I'm sure many of you are asking that, like, what is that same question? What is going to happen next? And now we want to know what's next in our lives, particularly over the last couple of years. We want to know what's next in work, and we want to know what's next in business, and we want to know what's next in brands. And I get asked a lot around what the future of Meta is, and probably a few more times in the last couple of weeks than I have done in the recently. But I guess we'll get into some of that as well. And in particular, what does that mean for companies, and what does that mean for brands, and what does that mean for businesses? And there are quite a lot of different answers, because in many ways, the platforms that Meta owns and works on are a reflection of us, a reflection of people. And as people evolve and change, either marrying with technology, leading technology, or utilizing technology, our platforms need to adapt to that as well. So today, I'm not going to give one definitive answer to that question of what's next, because I don't think there is one. Although if somebody's got it, like I'm really happy to to hear that, but rather talk about three themes that we're seeing that are both important aspects of the future, but are becoming incredibly potent and powerful right now as well. And they are creators, commerce, and the next computing platform. So those are the three. So I'm going to demonstrate at the end like how these fit together into the wider vision for the metaverse. So let's start talking about creators. And now there are millions of creators now worldwide. In fact, the venture capital firm Signal Fire estimates there are 50 million people around the world who consider themselves content creators. So people that use their brand, their experiences, their skills to effectively kind of make a living in some way, either in total or subsidize some of their other areas of life. Now, while the technology side, the information estimates that venture capital firms have invested an estimated $2 billion into 50 creator-focused startups just this year. And I think we've all got our personal favorites on whatever platforms we're using. And certainly kind of a gentleman, Francis Bourgeois, is one of my favorites. He is deeply passionate about trains and train spotting, something that I thought I had no interest in, but actually his passion for and joy around his has really created this incredible following. Now close to 1 million people follow us on Instagram and a lot across kind of platforms as well. And he just recently announced that he's going to give up his job. He's going to make this his full-time job to pursue his passion for a train. So take a look at him. I also really like Linda Ginger, who's a brilliant travel creator. I really love to travel and experience different cultures. And of course, that's been a bit harder to do the last couple of years. But her passion and her insight into when she goes into different countries, different communities, I find kind of incredibly compelling. And she's working with a lot of different brands as well. And over the last decade, creators like these have been able to build communities, develop really personal relationships with their followers. And I'll come back to that personal relationship part, as well as interesting relationships with brands as well. And in particular, one of the accelerators we've seen here for marketeers, it was quite hard to produce traditional advertising during isolating. So creators are able to fill this gap really quickly with their own content, help brands get their messages out. And this content worked not just because of the reach that creators have, but also because of the connection that they have with audience. And what we're seeing in research is that for 18 to 34-year-olds in particular, 63% of them say that they trust what a creator says about a brand more than they trust what a brand says in its own advertising, which has some sense to it. I mean, that number sounds both high, but also almost common sense at the same time. And the creator economy is really booming, and it's only going to get bigger. And we want our platforms to be the best place for millions of creators to earn a living. So we've announced we're going to keep all of our creator tools free to use right the way through 2023. And we're going to invest over $1 billion in creators across Facebook and Instagram. And we know kind of in particular that creators love using video. So makeup editorials, inspiring. Just before we came on, actually, Andrew mentioned that Lex from L'Oreal, I think it was one of the most recent speakers, and like to see how the influence in the beauty industry has shifted hugely in a way from publications to individuals and the creators that's there over the last few years. Has really been quite something to watch, and certainly video has been core to that. So with the creator economy booming, we were the area that brands really need to understand it to a great degree of depth. And certainly one of the questions we're asking when companies are asking us about this, we're saying, who do you have on your team that really understands creators and how to work with them? How do you know how teams of influencers are structured? And it sounds kind of an obvious thing to do, but quite often it isn't there. So it needs a generational shift and a generational connection, often within the marketing departments and organizations themselves. And sometimes those people that really understand creators aren't the ones that are in the marketing department. They might be in other parts of the business as well. So that sourcing of knowledge and understanding has been really critical. And we've seen the success of that for companies like Gymshark. And we're very lucky that Gymshark sit on our client council, and one of their mantras is just when you join Gymshark is forget everything you know. Like they come with your experience, but forget what you know, because we're rewriting a lot of these rules as they come. And I think if you're not aware of Gymshark, it's a UK based a sports apparel brand, which is one of the most recent confirmed unicorns. So really impressive. And of course, like because of that, I wonder how many people on this, or maybe Andrew yourself, I don't know, maybe not, but how many people over the last 18 months have bought something because a creator shared it with you or you got excited. Now I'm a proud owner of several really beautiful wireless chargers for that exact reason. Wireless chargers, like I got them here. I haven't got my nice ones here, but yeah, phone chargers, they're not great looking, and yet they hang around the table. There's beautiful like marble wireless charger that I drop my phone on and it just feels really good. And that's a creator that inspired me to do that. So we get creators, we see them getting involved in really interesting shopping activations. And there's another aspect here, which is fascinating to watch, which is live shopping. And particularly in China. Almost 1 in 3 Chinese internet users have used live shopping. So the numbers are always staggering, but just to give that some context of population-wise, that's the equivalent of every single person in Germany, France, Spain, and the UK buying something live, buying something on a live shopping experience. And this is a channel that didn't even exist 5 years ago. We saw a great example most recently with Peloton, who, to celebrate Black History Month, created a capsule collection with 4 Black designers, including Monica Anoho. And Peloton invited her onto Instagram to talk about her work with a member of Peloton staff. That video was shoppable. So while you're listening to Monica, you can just click and buy the items and they're there and yours. So we're seeing a very different, and the words I talked about earlier, more immersive, more personal, more engaging form of marketing communications, and the kind of the stretching and the simultaneous stretching and the shrinking of the funnel, depending on kind of different moments. And live shopping is just one example of commerce that we're seeing around the world, and commerce on our platforms. And we look to future, commerce is going to be a big part of that. So we want to create better experiences for people and for businesses. And we use the term discovery commerce. There's the shift that we're seeing from search, where you go looking for items you want to buy, to discover, where curated experiences, created channels are enabling you to find things that you perhaps didn't know you wanted until you saw them, or indeed a better version of the thing that you want to. So just for example, I was scrolling through Facebook the other day and I saw an ad for a travel to Tresco Island, which is a archipelago off of the Cornish coastline. And I've been there a few times and I love it, but I haven't been for a while. And it was great to see that they've got a new thing open. And I'd seen this in my news feed. It might have felt like a bit of serendipity, but it wasn't. It was actually a very kind of good data and signals insight driven experience, and it's pretty cool stuff. And it enables brands of all sizes, companies of all sizes, to benefit from things that actually only larger brands, or larger organizations might have had in the past. And then within the commerce experience, we're working on ways to prevent that frustration that when you click on an ad, you have that discovery moment. It is pretty annoying when you have to go somewhere else, and it's a bit clumsy. The dropouts occur, you get a little frustrated, the bandwidth might be there. So we're looking at ways to combine the discovery and commerce elements together so you can stay within the platform, and incorporating marketplace and messaging too. So for example, we just created a WhatsApp link to chat button on Instagram. So people can start chatting with a business within that context in just one tap. And there's a whole other talk to do on business messaging and how that's kind of shaping personalized commerce down the road. And then we have things like Facebook shops that we've introduced, which are basically a virtual storefront that can sit on Facebook page or an Instagram page, which allows people to enable them to go from almost instantaneously create a digital shopping experience, and something that particular small and medium businesses, for them, it's been critical across the pandemic, when the only way we could buy was online. And a lot of those businesses have actually thrived over the last 18 months. And we're seeing that people enjoy these things. So there are now over 300 million monthly visitors to shops, and about 1.2 million monthly active shops. And this is a product that didn't exist, again, 14 months ago. I have a bit of But I don't know if I could call it kind of associated pride, but I hope it doesn't feel like stolen honor. But because I live and work in the UK, that tool was designed, developed, created, launched entirely by the UK based commerce team, whilst they were all working virtually as well from their homes. So that associated pride I have with them is it's quite nice for me. It's kind of great. It's great to see that there. So commerce is a really, really exciting area and a big opportunity for a lot of growth that we're seeing. Now you might have noticed that so far the things I'm talking about have been focused on this device, on our mobile phones, whether that's creators, live shopping, business messaging. But the truth is we're thinking about, and we need to think about how the future extends just beyond what fits in the palm of our hand to some of those technologies. So the third and final area I'll touch on is the next computing platform. And what we've seen in history is that ever since the birth of modern computing, back in the 50s, is that roughly every decade and a half, every 15 years, a new computing platform appears. And the last one was the real introduction of smartphones, in particular, the seminal moment of the iPhone launch in 2007. So there is a new platform appearing over the next few years. We really believe that it's inevitable. And what we're doing at Meta is continue investing in building the technology, the products that deliver that full sense of presence, which is a hard thing to describe, but I think we know it when we feel it. We know it, and particularly when we experience technology that gives us more presence. When we go to a technology that gives us less presence, we definitely feel that gap. So we adjust really, really, really quickly. And to give a sense of what we're focusing on, so whether that's the things like the Oculus VR headset, to AR gloves, wristband technologies, to give a sense of this, we now have 10,000 people working on in our Facebook reality labs on VR and AR and the evolving technologies with which we'll access the internet. So all of these are going to come together, creators, commerce, and next computing platform, into what's broadly called the Metaverse. And the Metaverse, in essence, think about it as rather than as this platform experience of we used to type in, we used to write to the internet. That was the first one with our desktops, which was okay. I mean, if you're dyslexic like me, a little challenging at times, maybe not as accessible as you want it to be, but like work well. Then we went to looking at the internet, which is principally what we do with our individual personalized screens, typically through phones. The next way, where the Metaverse really becomes a sense of a kind of embodied internet, so an internet that we actively participate in, and that's and that will be in many, many different ways. And we certainly want to see how the things that you can't do in the through the internet like now, or things that we could do better. And our aspiration is moving from a social media company to a metaverse company. So you're going to hear a lot about this over the next 5 to 10 years. And it's certainly something that we're not going to be building alone, and it will happen without us. But it will be brands as well, helping to really understand what their role and as it plays out. And perhaps the best way to get our heads around it at the moment is to try it out with the technology that's part of it. So things like Horizon Workrooms, which is a virtual working space that you can have in VR. Again, I just mentioned to Andrew, like the other day, I was in a Horizon Workroom, and I have some hearing loss. So to me, the sense of presence was so enhanced by audio technology that enabled, if somebody was speaking, and if in the room they were further away, I would hear their voice still differently to those that were closer to me. And that being able to have that directly was really impressive. And then for the second half of the meeting, we went to Venice, and it was really, really quite something. Or even things like Beat Saber, which is our kind of best-selling game. So, but it's not just that VR experience; it's also things like AR, which we're already seeing work. So, for example, Made.com saw how when they introduced a 3D scaled virtual furniture kind of app, VR app through their phones, they saw purchases increase by 2.5% and an ad recall increase of over 40%. And we weren't necessarily, we might have hoped for the first of those, like a more immersive experience creates a higher propensity to then go on to buy. I don't think we were expecting it to be as powerful at the top of the the top of the funnel as well. But it seemed as if that was the case. So that's really just the beginning. So go and take a kind of test drive and play with it. So our mission's been about always helping people connect in better, more immersive ways. And we're excited about what that technology looks like. So really, to end where I began, that question of what's next, I truly believe that particularly in brands, business, and marketing, those who are going to thrive are going to be the ones that are more connected, provide richer, deeper, and more personal experiences for their customers. And whilst that sounds, some of these are a little way ahead, a lot of this is already happening right now. So yeah, hopefully that gives a little sense of just an aspect of what we're thinking about as a company. And yeah, thanks for that, Andrew. And that kind of
thanks, Steve. And so, I mean, gosh, there's lots of things I could ask you about after that. But so what I find interesting is this notion of these different technologies now coming together to create this. So like augmented reality with spatial audio, or you talked about VR, and then sort of the audio experience is actually really important, and spatial technologies in that, and so on. And so, how, if we just kind of stick with that for a minute, how are the teams within Meta kind of approaching this? Because you also said at one point that the platforms are in part a reflection of us as people and what we want to do, and the dynamics of our changing needs for different types of digital experiences. And so, but there is this chicken and the egg problem, I guess, in terms of some of this. So I'm just kind of curious how this gets into, gets out of the lab, gets out of the sort of the engineering world and into particularly in the context of marketing and advertising, for instance, something that, a brand will want to say, hey, we need to partner to have this type of experience. So how does this come to commercial life, I suppose?
How does it feel real already? Yeah, I think probably like two parts to that. Yeah, there's one, the more kind of fast forward, the forward future looking part of this. And, I think there are a number of companies and brands that are already trying what it's like to create their own either kind of experiences, or I often look at the fashion world for this, because they tend to be, actually in particular, it's been part of the iconography of the fashion world in a way to demonstrate how their understanding of culture by the platforms that they're using for their shows and experiences. So you see quite a lot of that. I just saw a great kind of immersive experience that Burberry have just put together, which would demonstrate that. But these are very, very experimental. I just want to be really clear, like up front, that world is quite far away. The kind of that virtual world is quite some distance from, but we're already seeing brands begin to play with it. And then whether that's, I noticed that Burberry, I just stick in with them for a minute. 2 years ago, they held their runway show on Instagram and Discord, for example. So they say, okay, like we think this is an exciting platform. This year it's Instagram, and it was one other, but I can't. Maybe it was just Instagram. I can't remember, but well, kind of like, sorry, that sounded a bit self-serving in saying Instagram twice in that, but I promise I'll find the second one and come back. But it was really interesting. Like, how do you embody and demonstrate your sense of, I understand the edge of culture? And fashion brands are really, really interesting in that area. We're seeing lots of like really great interest from car brands as well. We're seeing lots of where there's a great kind of collective experience, and also entertainment brands. And so some of this will be creating your own experiences. Some of this will be combining with creators, and some of this will be combining with the existing IP into new ways. And I would say most of this is right now, though. Certainly, the world of AR is actually much more developed than I think people are aware of and realize. And we're certainly seeing brands really begin to understand, and that Made example is I think it's going to be the first of many where we'll see the kind of public outcomes of these different experiences that are more immersive, personalized to you because you're making it, and thirdly, enabling brands to really bring their communities into working out the experiences that work best for them. So I'd say think about kind of certainly what the VR experience, AR experience looks like, and then think about right now, and then the longer term, what the VR one is.
Yeah, I guess it's really about providing the additionally, sort of the tools for brands to experiment and test and learn, as we
have a play. Come
and try it out, and I guess in some sense democratizing access to that as well. So it's not just sort of the high end of the market, but small businesses can try things as well. And I think that good example of that actually is with shoppable commerce, where as you were saying before, has just really opened up sort of a new way to reach customers for every type of business, large and small, and everything in between.
And it feels so. Well, I mean, when I first started marketing, I was in the media department, which was very unfashionable. Then anybody remembers Mad Men, which is still a brilliant series, right? But like the media guy was definitely it was a pretty accurate portrayal of like where media stood in the advertising kind of landscape, and to see how technology is and that intersection of kind of technology and creativity, I think is incredibly exciting to see now.
But talk about users, and so there's a few questions that have popped up, I think, about users in one way or another, and actually might start with one about sort of the development of inclusive technology for people with disabilities, and how Facebook or Meta is thinking about the sort of metaverse development in that more inclusive way, and structuring e-commerce fulfillment to suit the broad range of disabilities, and just all sorts of ways of thinking about this from a user standpoint.
Yeah, this is an incredibly important question, and I mean, I literally we could spend the next the remaining time talking about it, because it's so rich and so important. But maybe just to say two things on this, which is the on the development of the metaverse. Certainly, the mindset that we're going into this is no surprises. I think we've certainly seen technology over the last 10 or 15 years has moved at such a pace, often at a faster pace than that we might have seen kind of certainly kind of regulation, for example, keep up with. And we're beginning to see a kind of correction of that in a really positive way, I would say. We don't want the metaverse to do the same thing. So it is about a slow build. It's about ensuring that right from the beginning, that the aspects of inclusion, the ethics of the building are set. So Nick Clegg, who's our global head of public affairs, announced a couple of weeks ago that we've issued out a £50 million dollar grant over the next 2 years to partner with academics, ethicists, philosophers, organizations to really set some of these. Well, actually, one, make sure the right questions are being asked, and then two, find the answers to those questions. And again, it won't be us doing this alone, but we hope that's going to be a great kind of important catalyst. But for just to go back to where accessibility has to sit right at the heart of this. One of my personal heroes in Facebook is an engineer called Matt King, and he is our accessibility team. And he wasn't born blind, but in fact, he lost his sight halfway through his engineering degree. And his work, he works very deeply on the machine learning that helps photo identification. So you have captions in your feed, and he demonstrated to me what his feed is like and how they've worked on it. And this is particularly true where how we communicate has really quite quickly moved from text-based to visually based, whether that's photos or video. And if you're one of the hundreds of millions of people around the world that are blind or partially sighted, that's a challenge, because actually text-based verbalization and recognition is very well advanced. Image-based isn't. So he shared this example that they're working on, that he was a couple of years ago, so it's moved on quite a lot since then. But a post drops into his feed and it says, John has posted, post contains text. Text says, Friday night splurge, ! And I mean, it's quite good that you're able to hear that, like your friends posted and they said a word, but your mind goes into all sorts of curious places about what John's Friday night splurge might be and look like. But then when you have this one additional line in that readout of the post, which says post contains picture contains pizza. Now, all of a sudden, that inclusion of that single word transforms the sense of understanding around that post and a sense of inclusion. And then probably as a third element, and that's we're always building that into our products as they evolve. And then just my final maybe point to make on this one as well, on inclusion, which is I think it's certainly going to be true that we will see a less distributed metaverse initially globally than we've seen social media, for example. So we work really hard to create things like Facebook Lite, which are a very, very low bandwidth, but very good version of Facebook. So in areas that are low connectivity or where data pricing is very high, people are still able to incorporate that. So, but we think if a company like us doesn't do the investments up front, we're never going to get there for everyone. So there's a big part of inclusion, which is around the base cost of the technology. And, whilst in many parts of the world, anywhere, like, $250 is a lot of money. That's a lot of technology for what it is. And we kind of hope over time, as these things begin to ramp up and the volume increases, that we can, bring that entry kind of cost down, kind of lower and lower. It's why many of these things are kind of pretty much at cost at the moment. But that's what it takes if you're going to create technology change.
Yeah,
I did okay. I could have done half an hour on this, but
actually, as a follow-up, I was going to ask about the affordability aspect. And I mean, yes, the cost of the devices will come down, but there's then also sort of the data demands and also the infrastructure in other parts of the world. So, I mean, it's not even that, say, in the UK, 5G is particularly great or extensively rolled out, but let alone in other parts of the world. So with the more immersive technologies, will there be, I mean, I'm guessing a Facebook Lite equivalent isn't really necessarily what would happen, because the point of the technology is immersion. But what are maybe some other ways that you're all thinking about getting this out to the rest of the world as quickly as possible, I suppose?
Yeah, well, the timelines for this really are 5, 10, 15. So we should think about the timelines like this in the same way that I think it was going to be the year of mobile for about 10 years before it was the year of mobile, and then nobody uses that phrase anymore. So probably I'm sure it'll be the year of the metaverse and when we stop saying the year of the metaverse, that's probably the one we've got.
And it will be.
And that was something else. I'm kind of like sure that happened down the line. But I mean, I think you can see our seriousness certainly of our intent in the price point and in the enabling of the technology to make it as accessible as possible. So I think we want to get that as those. On the data side of things, it's fascinating. I'm sure I'm not the first person to say that when you look at countries who have gone immediately mobile first, like they just skipped that desktop, they went straight to mobile. Actually, the infrastructure is strengthening all the time, and their speed of adoption and usage is really incredible. I mean, I think particularly if you look into, APAC is a huge region, so a huge area. So I don't want to categorize it in one, too simply. But if you look at the kind of uptake and usage and innovation and the speed of take up in those areas, it's pretty phenomenal. So yeah, you would expect to see that this will happen in some countries first, but the longer term role of both data usage, pricing and hardware, you can see these come together kind of pretty well over the long term.
And then so maybe another question about, as we sort of develop this future over 5, 10, 15 years, is sort of around, still sticking with users. There's a few questions in here about thinking about safety, but also thinking about sort of how to ensure the positives instead of the negatives. And so a good example, as you know, Steve, is some of the research that we've been doing around social media use and how it affects people's well-being. And it's not all bad, and it's not all the way that the press would portray it, because if you're having these meaningful connections, as someone said in one of the questions, it's, life is less isolating, and it connects people, over big distances. And we've seen the value of that time and time again. And so as we move into this new computing platform, what are some of the approaches that maybe Meta is taking already, but certainly we should think about, not just actually for Meta, but as sort of a collective industry, I suppose, in thinking about how we really build into it the positives, as opposed to worrying too much about the negatives, yet protecting us from the negatives, I suppose.
Yeah, well, to some extent, it's a really good idea to worry about the negatives as well. Ideally, like before, and we really do. I mean, in terms of the investments in safety and integrity, removing harmful content, thinking about how our apps are helpful versus not helpful. And of course, I imagine I can really clearly imagine that over the next few years there'll be lots of debates in this area, because any technology creates that. It creates kind of discussions, and you have to. I mean, I feel really proud of where we are in this, and we invest a lot, and our removal rates are really strong when it comes to harmful content, but also the connection that people have seen, and in many ways, the pandemic, made that more underscored than ever. Whether that's being able to Zoom like we are right now with friends and family, or a WhatsApp call or others, these things really underscored kind of how important that connection is in not just reducing isolation, but also increasing creativity and increasing accessibility as well. And you don't, again, it probably feels like this references a lot of the topics on inclusion as well. Like the ability to be able to contribute wherever you are in the world or wherever you are in the country, that's a huge economic enabler. We'll be a 50% remote company within the next few years. And that means, you don't have to be in the West Coast or in London, or you can be anywhere in the world and building that. And I don't think we're going to be alone in that kind of level of inclusion. And then at the people side, I guess more than maybe the commercial side of these things, I think it really goes back to that point of presence, that to make the time that we spend online, not more time, but a richer and closer time. And I remember when I first got my Portal, and Portal's principally a video calling hardware that you from Facebook. It's bloody incredible. I sent it to my mum, and I'm so glad we're able to connect like that over the past couple of years. But what I think the important thing to recognize in this area as well, none of this stuff stands still. Video calling was science fiction not that long ago, and now I did a talk some years back now called From Magic to Myth, and like just how quickly we adopt technology. What could feel magical one day, we would just go a bit the next day, and it's not like, oh my god, I'm able to video call my mum and I can speak to her. It's like, this bandwidth isn't that great. This picture's a bit pixelated. Like the audio is not as good as it could be. So this is when I go back to that original point, like about people's expectations of what they want. People's expectations are so incredibly high all of the time. So you have to keep innovating. I don't know if I fully encapsulated that question, by the way, but I think at the heart of it is time spent with a better sense of presence. It's hard to imagine that isn't a positive one, that is that for all the things that we know, social, that the research that you showed, that where research on decreases in loneliness, increases in well-being, and a stronger sense of connection. So I think about technology as an enabler of the connection and the sense that we have of being together, particularly when we can't be together.
And so I think, someone has also asked about younger users, and I want to come to that because often we I guess sort of have this preconception that when we're thinking about social media in particular, it's a young person's sort of thing, and that's where people get excited about new platforms. But actually, your example just before about Portal with your mum, I did the same thing. So these technologies can actually really open up things for elderly people as well. And if I think about it, how do I communicate with all sorts of people in my family, most of whom live in Australia? It's WhatsApp. Right. So it's not just for young people, but I guess when we think about, and I guess this is more predominantly in the social media platform space in particular, where we tend to see new things emerging, like TikTok, is sort of the recent one. Young people gravitate towards that. Everybody starts to say, oh yeah, here we go, Facebook and Instagram are going to lose users because, that's only where your grandma is or something like that. So how, and whether or not that's true, I don't know. But certainly people assume that this is the case. which therefore I suspect in a marketing context, advertisers might also make those assumptions. So how do you see innovation on, so we've been talking about innovation with metaverse and immersive technology, but what about innovation on, I guess, still today, what you would consider as the core platforms?
Yeah.
With a more maturing, not necessarily an age user base, but certainly a more established user base compared to the new entrants coming into the field.
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, competition is good, right? I mean, it's kind of like just good in general in kind of all aspects. So because it just drives, a whole bunch of innovation. But yeah, I mean, I kind of, there's certainly some quite differences between the way that it's to be positioned and the reality, like actually across Facebook and Instagram, for younger audiences, it's still the most popular thing to go and use, which is great. It's a real privilege across our platforms that is the case. But and also to bear in mind that young people are also tend to have a wider variety of platforms that they use as well. And as people, with a bit of the aging process, they, we tend to consolidate around one or two more than the kind of wide breadth that's there. But when we look at one of the most interesting aspects of this in the context of the metaverse is maybe like gaming gives us some clues as to how this might develop and evolve, that actually the gaming world, we've seen we've got a generation that's evolved with a very different expectation of gaming than the generation that preceded that. So what I mean by that is there's a generation that was used to playing games where it can be a great experience, really immersive in that sense of, but along certain lines, like you're making decisions along a track, and that roads, a lot of those roads are predefined, versus if you look at younger generations, their expectations of gaming, I mean gaming in the kind of broadest sense, it's much more, the games are, here's the tools, you now go and build. And you'll just, whether that, I guess, Minecraft gave us an early indication of that. Fortnite, maybe a little bit of yes and no, because it's, you've got more customization, but things like Roblox, all these things where, where literally the day after it came out, you can go and play like 4 different Squid games on Roblox. Like, that's amazing. Like somebody just went and built that and created that. And I think that creates a whole bunch of IP questions, of course. And that's a whole other field to think about. But that sense of wanting to really create and make and shape, and connect. And, we've seen things like Reels just hugely accelerate on Instagram, I should say, over the last few years after it's being introduced. So I think there's a format piece, but there's also a kind of role in people's lives. So you have to make sure you're performing a really, really useful role all of the time. And there's that creation of identity and expression that's so important to all of us, but particularly as you're developing your sense of self at a younger age.
So let's talk a little bit about something quite different, or maybe not quite different. We'll see. Business to business, and the use of these new emergent tools and platforms in that context. So, obviously Facebook has Workplace, which is a very useful tool for collaboration and internal communication. But someone's asked a question about sort of how might B2B play out in a metaverse type world. And what might the I guess the B2B campaigns of the future look like? Kind of interesting.
No, that's great.
Trade show of the future in the metaverse or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll just give like 2 real life examples, because we're seeing this happen quite quickly already. And I mean, Workplace, for those that don't know, is effectively our enterprise internal and collaboration tool. So like Facebook, but a work version of it. And I don't know what I would do without it, to be honest. It's kind of one of the best things I've seen. And perhaps it picks up on one of the themes that you mentioned, Andrew, that when we're designing tools and systems, we want to make them as accessible and as easy to use as possible for as many people as possible. And that's why, something like Facebook broadly maps the UK, broadly maps the demographics of the country, maybe actually slightly younger, because smartphone penetration does taper off as you go into like 80s and 90s. But the same is true of Workplace. It was great because if you know how to use Facebook, then you know how to use Workplace principally. But the way that we're already seeing like organizations use particularly VR actually in a professional setting is fascinating. So whether that's people hosting conferences, people having their training programs running on, partly running in person, partly out running, where you see surgeons collaborating, and you already see this, to share their skills in a virtual environment and to train in a virtual environment. And so I think definitely workplace, anything that increases that sense of presence and connection, particularly on training, and I think it's going to be very, very significant. And then secondly, we haven't touched on it, but maybe, we're here, which is on education and how those types of tools can have quite a big impact, I would say, over time on access to education and that sense of immersion. So you're not just reading about the streets of Rome, you're putting aside part of your time to go in there and experience it and see it live. So definitely see the number of applications. I mean, and even if I say that, even as I say these things myself, I'm thinking, oh man, am I being too limited in my thinking? And that's why, to think about it. I think that's why people that are able to like see these technologies and see how they can apply to an existing problem or to enable an existing thing that people really want to do in a better way. And certainly skills development. I don't think I've shared this one before, but even things like bias training, to do that in a virtual environment rather than a environment, and I've seen examples of this. It's incredibly, incredibly powerful work because you just have that greater sense of connection than you might do if you're reading a PowerPoint slide. So if you can embody that a bit more, I can see these things being very powerful. Hopefully that answers the question that someone asked, but it's a great area. I mean, if anybody is thinking about, looking at a business or, some startups, or I think that is going to be a very rich area to explore.
Mm-hmm. And just since you mentioned skills development, someone's also asked about how will, young people, I'm guessing like MBA students watching us now, how will they sort of build skills to improve their employability for jobs that require, I guess, the skills to develop things for, the metaverse or experiences, or even just to think about what that could be. I mean, obviously there's a creative element to that, but there's also, I guess, an engineering element to that. So what should people start to do to get ready for, those jobs that start to come?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if anybody's thinking about coding at all, then like just do. I try to encourage my kids in that direction. One's going to go into, I think, probably media production, and the other's going to be a chemist. So, I didn't quite get there. No, like, good for them. But things like coding, my goodness, I mean, the demand that's going to be there is going to continue. It's only going to increase. The tools and skills that you can learn online, and I'll come back to this online point, are incredibly good, incredibly powerful, and really, really valued. So, and it's also, I mean, in terms of inclusion, it's an incredible role. You can take those skills anywhere, you can work remotely. So, but that's just one aspect of this to underscore. But if you want to do that, like, do jump in, and there's loads of online training to do. All of these other aspects, companies like ourselves, and I know kind of Google do a lot in this area as well. There's actually a lot of online, often for free, digital skills training that are accredited. So you can take those, you can learn those skills and develop those skills right now. And I think what I love that sits at the heart of this question is, how do I learn by doing? How do I learn by really getting into the technology, playing with it, trying to break it, to form new ways of doing it? And I would just suggest, like, look at us, look at other organizations like us, seeing the things that they provide, and then, use the incredible communities that courses and experiences like the one you provide and you do, in bringing you together in a collegiate way. But yeah, go make. Please.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, learn by doing, I think is a great way. And actually, even just, I would say, advice to the students is also just think about all the kind of out there wild use cases for these technologies.
100%. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. It's and you may well like spot and identify something that no one's spotted. It's really, really, really possible.
Yeah, like in fact, someone has asked, and how do we think offline spaces will evolve to include online spaces?
Yeah, that's a great one.
You could dream up all sorts of crazy things, but what do you think, Steve?
Well, I was just thinking. I immediately go a little bit into my my wheelhouse of commerce. But just 2 weeks ago, I was in Bournemouth High Street. Actually, we were doing some filming with Mary Portas, who's who is basically a retail merchandising expert in the UK. She's pretty well known. She wrote the report for the Cameron government about how to revitalize the high street. And so what we've done in a number of high streets up and down the country is created basically a virtual storefront for the small businesses in those areas. So we're just basically encouraging people to shop local and support small businesses in their area as they go into Christmas. And it was really great, actually, to see like people get their phone out, snap the QR code, start like shopping on that store. So I can, in that relationship between the virtual world and the physical world, I think it's only going to get stronger, and particularly where it's about experiences. So whether that's the high street becoming more of an experience economy proposition than a straight merchandising one, I think we're seeing that already. Perhaps some of the regulation and particularly some of the taxation pieces aren't yet there to get there, but that feels like a great opportunity. And things like virtual presence at concerts, or you kind of, your friends attending in real life, you attend virtually, but you might share an NFT that might just belong to you, which is like your equivalent of the photo at the end of the roller coaster that you could get to go, the snap that was sent that could just be yours. And, you can see how the stadium owner or the rights holder and others might, want those things to take place. And, just the other day, I was talking to somebody they were talking about how they're creating an NFT integration into some music art, with this musician, so that if you bought some of that, then that creates a code that then they create other experiences that might then get you invited to a real experience. So I think there's lots of ways where we see that intersection take place, particularly in the creative sectors, and particularly the things that we really value quite highly.
And I mean, I think, back to my point about just people should just come up with ideas, and actually probably where we're going to see a lot of these coming back full circle to talk about, thinking about creators, is where, if we've seen anything actually in terms of sort of how social video can be used in really interesting and creative ways, it's obviously, it's coming from those millions of people around the world. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's going to be a source of inspiration for new, particularly creative and artistic applications here. We're almost out of time, Steve, but actually, since I came back to creators, I wanted to ask.
I think there's a couple more questions. Are we? No, sorry, we're close time, but happy to take them as they come.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask, actually, there's a couple more questions in there, but since I just mentioned creators, is there anything kind of new or coming up in how we should be thinking about creators, particularly sort of as another type of marketing channel that you're seeing as sort of an innovative approach here, compared to kind of the now old, it sounds ridiculous saying old, influencer marketing approach, because that was just a year ago. But where is this going now?
Yeah, well, I think kind of what's pretty extraordinary is the rise. What you'll see, and what we hope to develop is make it easier to connect with for businesses to connect with the creators that are most suited to the content and the topic areas that they've got. So I think whereas before, an influencer in many ways would be somebody who is they are their own brand, in that sense, and that's quite broad, and that's seen as maybe having application into any particular vertical. What we're seeing is creators who have a particular skill set in creation, a particular point of view on some of the topics we talked about already, like cooking, travel, entertainment, all of these kind of like automotive, all of these lifestyle, in particular creators. They're really powerful, and what's been hard in the past before is to see, okay, well, who should I support? Who shouldn't I support? Who are the right ones? Who isn't? So we're thinking, and nothing to announce today, but just to say that what we're doing is thinking about how can we make that easier for brands? Mm-hmm. How can we make it easier to categorize the right types of creators, not right types, but creators that have either a certain threshold, a certain topic interest, and operate, of course, like with safety and integrity in mind as well. That has to be baked in, because certainly, if I think about one of the things that's reduced, or kind of the risk elements of influencers and creators, is when people aren't following some of the clear rules, like the kind of hashtag ad, like all of those inclusion things that have to be standard. So we work with a lot of the self-regulation in the UK and others around to help and facilitate that. But expect to see more work on more easily identifying the kind of networks of influencers that creators that people can work with. And the one thing, if I were to ask anyone who's advising other kind of brands as well, is to really think about inclusion here and the diversity of influencers that they are working with, because there is an incredible body of people that create incredible work that perhaps don't always get the attention. So our big job is, how do we surface their incredible work to brands and companies in more effective and easier ways over the next couple of years.
And so maybe one last question. So someone has asked about basically how does Meta balance people's users' needs for privacy with also limiting their ability to cause harm or spread misinformation, or so in the context of WhatsApp, for example, with encryption, okay, no one's reading the messages. So, but how does this balancing act play out in real life?
Well, the balance of, I guess, sort of freedom of expression and freedom from harm is a big one that maybe that's another topic we can come into kind of like later on. But particularly when it comes to encryption, so there are a combination of ways of approaching this. One is information campaigns on the apps themselves, so to ensure that people are that much more aware of the content they're sharing, aware of the impact that it might have. That's what's in a way a kind of soft approach. And then there's a more harder technology approach. So, for example, a good most recent example we had of that, which is limit forwards. So limiting the number of times a message can be forwarded. So, and in the future, particularly when it comes to an encrypted environment, the integrity plans are more rooted in systematic product adaptation than some of the other content removal approaches that we've seen work very, very effectively. So whether that's limits, whether that's questions, whether that's challenging. So I don't know if anybody's ever had that. You'll have something that says this has been forwarded many times. So that's a bit of a trigger. And then when it's reached a certain number, you can only then forward that to either one group or one individual, because quite often we see in those most challenging areas of those areas of harmful content was when they create a virality. So by restricting that, that helps to significantly reduce the exposure to content, which may be truthful but creating kind of challenges. So a big area that I'd love to go in, maybe into more in, and actually love to hear the perspective of the MBA participants as well on this one, on where you draw the right lines here. But think about, in an encrypted world, soft activities that help the tonality and individual awareness, and then systematic product changes which reduce the exposure to harmful content, rather than the removal of the content proactively, which is what we would do in newsfeed environments, for example.
That's actually a really good way of distinguishing between the approaches. Bake it into the product when it's an encrypted product, so that people can still have trust in the privacy of the product, but in some sense it's
you de-risking.
The aim are that you can't share things too many times or forward things too many times, or whatever it might be. Well, I mean, I'm afraid we're out of time, but I think you've basically offered to come back. So
I'd love to. It was so
love to have you,
with you. So
and maybe even all going well, maybe actually in Oxford for sort of a, you never know, for a conversation around some of these other sort of societal issues. I think it'd be really interesting to get into.
I love that, Andrew, and I have a potential prospective future chemist and she would certainly like to come and take a look around as well. It's on her aspirational roadmap a couple of years from now. So yeah.
All right. Well, let's consider that something for in the next, later this academic year, but in the next calendar year we'll do that, because I think it'd be great to just have a wide conversation about these sorts of issues that the tech industry obviously has to face. But unfortunately, we are out of time, and I need to make sure the students get to whatever their next class is, or maybe it's lunchtime, I'm not sure. But Steve, thank you so much for spending some time with us. It was really, really insightful and interesting to just sort of start to in a more practical way, start thinking about how technology is going to evolve for all of us in the coming years, and what ideas we can start to bring to that. So I think that was just really excellent to hear from you on that. And all of you watching, thank you. Hopefully this has sparked some ideas, maybe some entrepreneurial ideas. You might create the first metaverse unicorn, for all we know. Let's hope that happens, and good luck to you in that process. But again, thanks for joining, everybody. Steve, thanks a lot, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, Andrew.